Welcome to the Pop Cult Podcast. Here are your hosts, Ariana and Seth.
I'm Seth.
I'm Ariana.
And this is the Pop Cult Podcast. Today we've got another duo of recent releases. A little later, we're going to be talking about the animated film Flow. But first up, we will be discussing Christmas Eve in Miller's Point. A family gathers on Christmas Eve for what could be the last holiday in their ancestral home. As the night wears on and tensions arise, one of the teenagers sneaks out with her friends to claim the wintry suburb for her own. This is the third film from Tyler Taormina that we have watched, I think, this year. The previous films we've watched from him, we've talked about on the podcast, Ham on Rye and Sapper's Comet. What do we think of Tyler Taormina as a director?
I think that they have this wonderful ability to really know what the texture and the feeling was to specific eras that they go into. So Ham on Rye is that almost cult-like tribal feeling of being a teenager, which is reflected back to us when the teenager in this movie slips out in the middle of the festivities. And with Sapper's Comet, there's like this it's one of those movies that it's okay to put in the background because the story isn't really that important because the mood is what's setting it up, right?
I would say all these movies, one of the big things they have in common is they are liminal movies.
Yes.
It's this sort of, I want to look up the word liminal now that I've used it, because I'm like, is that what liminal means? Yeah. So it's occupying a position at or on both sides of a boundary or threshold relating to a transitional or initial stage of a process. So I think it works in this context in that his movies feel like being a young person in this moment where you're not really sure what's going to happen next. And you're just kind of
Yes.
like vibing for the time being.
Yeah, where you don't really get to dictate what happens.
But you're
You
very
just
aware.
Yeah, it's getting to the point that's like it's the years after, the age of like 4 or 5, when you're aware of the festivities, when you're becoming to like, okay, we all get bundled up and we go to grandma's house for this time on Christmas Eve, and then we maybe go to our other grandparents' house on Christmas Day, or we spend it at home for whatever reason. Like you either have to, this argument between being like you have to be dressed up to the nines. So as we saw reflected in the children who are younger are dressed by their parents in like little bow ties and stiff dresses, knowing that they're going to be there the whole day and not going to really leave any place. And then the teenagers that are more relaxed because they have a better say of what they're going to wear,
Yeah.
and they're also have better arguments about like we're just going to be there eating. Why would I have to dress up?
It reminded me a lot of a novella that I have read twice. It's one of the few books I've read multiple times. Enchanted Night by Stephen Millhauser. And it's a novella that's set over one night in a Connecticut town where it's just like one of those movie cliches where it's like there's just something in the air. And so there's not really any plot in that book. There's no heroes or villains. It's just one chapter will focus on a group of teenagers who are like out roaming around at night. Another chapter will focus on like a literal satyr that has emerged from the woods and is like cavorting with like the animals. Another chapter is like a little kid who can't fall asleep and is waking up and like seeing like magical things outside their window.
Yeah.
Or so it's this mix of like melancholy and magical.
Yes.
And I think that is Tyler Taormina's work. It's melancholy and magical.
Yes.
I would also say it's similar to Tim and Eric. I think we talked about this when we were watching it. I said, but with the grotesque elements turned way down.
Yeah, especially when it comes to like that horror series that they had. What was that name of it?
Bedtime Stories.
The bedtime.
It's a very good show.
Because bedtimes had a little bit more of a structure, the characters were a little bit more stable, And it also had to do with the fact that like we're talking about these family elements. So what I really liked about that in this movie, even though it's very light in the story, it was this feeling of being like it's the early 2000s, which was interesting because for me it's hitting clearly, right? Because like I early 2000s, like I was like 15, you were 18, so because you were like saying, oh, I felt like
18, 19,
that you
yeah.
felt a little bit too old for this, but to
Well,
me
no,
I'm
it
like,
was, I still, there's enough of, well, I think here's how I'll describe it. The details of this movie are presented so vividly while in this like dreamlike atmosphere
mhm.
that even though I have never experienced a lot of the things that happen in this movie, I read it as a wholly authentic and lived in experience.
Yeah, it feels like even though like my experience is more like set in Puerto Rico.
So yeah, it's not like Long Island.
Yeah, it's not Long Island, but it's like having all the cousins there. Having cousins that you don't know very well that are dressed to the nines when they're little kids being like, "Aren't you uncomfortable? But that's what mom made you wear," kind of thing. The cousins all playing video games together. And
Or there was one cousin that's kind of playing the video games and the younger kids are just watching.
yes.
And that felt
But this
very
one
real.
was a little bit more wholesome because like one of the kids goes like, "Oh, do you want to play?" instead of hogging it like the way
Yeah.
we could remember as a
Well,
kid.
you compare it to something like, let's say, Home Alone, and
Yeah.
especially the opening like 20 minutes of Home Alone and the way that presents the family gathered in the house versus this. Home Alone does not feel real.
No.
That like, yeah, I mean, the mansion is something that is not really attainable in my family. But like just the interactions with like the uncle, like how nasty and mean he is,
Yeah.
that's like cartoonish. Here, everyone feels very real.
Yes. I like the subtle conversations between like Francisca Scorsese's character with
Michelle.
Michelle, who's supposed to, we assume that it's the mom, and it's obviously that she's talking about her grades and how she's being almost like consoled, even though it doesn't seem like her grades were just that bad, but it's someone who wants to be the best.
So who is Michelle talking to in that?
We think it's like her
Well, I
mom or
think
something.
we that was one of the things that's interesting about this movie is he also throws you in and doesn't have any exposition as to who's whose kid and
No.
who's, but you can figure it out visually. Like I noticed the kids that were dressed up really nice all looked Asian. And that's when we noticed there was one of the daughters had an Asian husband. So I
Yeah.
immediately was like, oh, that's their kids.
Yes.
Uh, like, because those adults were dressed up. And so there was like a visual cue there, not just that they were Asian, but also that they were dressed really nice.
Yes.
And so you knew they were from the same family. Uh, and then with Michelle, Francesca Scorsese's character, she is the daughter of the man who owns, who is, yeah, let's go back a little bit. The house they're coming to is grandma's house.
Yes.
And we have a group of middle-aged adults
Yeah,
who are her
siblings.
children.
Yeah.
And then we have the sort of early 20s teenage cousins. There's a couple cousins that are like late 20s, maybe going into early 30s, like
There,
established.
yeah, there's some cousins that are already like either late or mid 20s that already had either have kids or are having
They have
their
like a
first
baby
children.
or something,
Yeah.
yeah. And then you have like the little kids.
Yeah.
And each of these groups of people is kind of in their own world. The adult grandchildren are hanging with their parents,
Yes.
but the teenagers and like Francesca Scorsese's Michelle feels like she's kind of right on that cusp. This
Yes.
might be one of the last Christmases where she's spending a lot of time with the teenage cousins.
Yeah, and it's almost like this understanding warmth about her.
Yeah, like because she's a little older, she's been through some stuff, she can offer you advice.
Or just like I understand you want to go have fun kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Uh, but the thing that really nailed it for me, and I think is a testament to what a great filmmaker Taormina is he understands something from an adult perspective that the kids don't understand about Christmas. And it's something that I understand now about holidays. And we talked a little bit about this off mic, of course.
Yes.
That Holidays are one of the few occasions where all of the adults can be in the same place at the same time,
Yes.
which in turn makes holidays the place where important, uncomfortable conversations are had.
Yes.
So for the adults, holidays lose the magic they did as a child because they become about heavy things and
Mm-hmm.
about you really, as an adult, have to acknowledge the passage of time.
Yes.
Where, as a kid, Christmas feels so frozen in this magical space. But as an adult, in this instance, we have a bunch of middle-aged adults who are having to decide what's going to happen with their mother. Her husband died years prior. Her health is not great. She cannot live alone.
Mm-hmm.
And there is one adult sibling that is living with her, and his family lives in that house.
Yeah.
And it's a strain on him because of how much work it takes and time. And like they can't, because of the lack of grandma's mobility, it means there has to be someone at the house all the time.
Yeah.
So he and his family are kind of restricted. And there's a really great scene in an upstairs bedroom, which I think is Michelle's bedroom, because I think we see her falling
Yes.
asleep there that night, uh, where all the adult siblings are gathered up, their brothers and sisters, to talk about this. And I thought it was a really well performed conversation. I don't know how much was improv or how much was written, but like the brother who is shouldering the burden of caring for the mother just does that actor does a really good job of just conveying frustration
Yeah.
and talk like kind of really snapping at one of the other siblings, just going like, well, why don't you live with her then?
Well, it's also like that interesting thing of it being like you have um two siblings that are going against the one that is
He wants to
already
sell the
taking
house.
caring who wants to sell the house and is already taking care of them. You have one sibling that is played by Maria
Dizia.
Dizia, who's kind of like she's on the fence. She understands where her brother is coming from, and then the other
Like the oldest brother.
yeah, but the oldest brother, and then like along with his sister, are kind of like, no, she should stay here. This is all she knows. She shouldn't go into a home. But like him, the one that's already taking care of her, is kind of like, you're not the one waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning to make sure she goes to the bathroom. You're
Yeah.
not the one who's having to clean up after her. And like he's like, well, what about my wife? And it's also like this sad moment where like the eldest who's not taking care of their mother goes like, but that's what your wife signed up for. And the one who's taking care of snaps, being like, what do you mean that's what she signed up for? None of us signed up for this.
Yeah.
And the anger that is felt because it's obviously like either phone calls are being avoided, that this is they have to force each other to talk about it now.
Well, and then
Um
there's the thing of that older sibling. I'm not sure if it's he's trying to pout and wants people to feel sorry for him, or he genuinely realizes like this is the last Christmas. It's when they all go out to do there's like is it like a Christmas carnival
yeah.
that they go to that's like in the town center, and the oldest brother stays behind in the house, and you have some people going like, "Oh, come on, Robert." I think his name was. "Oh,
Yeah.
come on, Robert. Don't be like that, Robert." He's like, "No, no, I'm fine." Because I think like the little kids are already asleep upstairs.
Yeah.
But it's one of those where no one's really a villain because in that even in that scene with that sibling, you're like, well, he's just. I could see how he just kind of wants to sit in the house with it silent because he needs to go through like a grieving process, losing
Yeah.
this house, sort of a thing. And then we have, of course, the Michelle and then Emily, who's one of the teenage cousins, sneak out of the house. There's friends of Emily's who are also sneaking out from their family's Christmas Eve stuff. And they kind of run around and get into that's the part that reminded me a lot of Ham on Rye,
Yes.
where it was kind of following like the secret lives of teenagers in Long
Mhm.
Island. Um, how do you, this is a question I had when I was thinking about this. How do you critique actors' performances in a movie like this? Because there's a mix of professional actors and clearly non-professional actors in the
Yeah.
movie. So when we talk about the performances, how do we talk about those?
I mean, it's interesting because like when it's inside the house, it is very good. Um, I could understand that some of the performance when it comes to the teenagers is kind of um all over the place, but it's also like this thing of being like the teenagers themselves are performing for each other.
They're very awkward. He can capture awkward so
Yes,
well.
and he does it so well.
And with a lot of like empathy.
It's
He's
also
not making fun of them for
yeah,
being
it's
awkward.
this thing that like for example, they're all out eating in a diner together and it's supposed to be that the family all exchanges gifts and the daughter was supposed to get the mother as something for a gift.
Oh, yeah, the Secret Santa, and then she pulls the gift because she gets kind of ashamed of it.
So what it is she's like they're about to throw away the trays of food and she puts the present on there and the person's like, "Are you sure you want to throw this away?" And she's like, "Yeah." And everybody's like, "Oh," like because they're all talking about how much they don't care. Like someone talks about like, "Oh yeah, I talked about wanting to ride horses and now my grandmother has me signed up for every month for like a horse
Magazine.
magazine." How embarrassing. And
What's
like
that? Yeah, it's trying to like be very ironic and sarcastic
and it's
about
like
like sentiment.
yeah, and it's like this thing of being like, "Oh, aren't grandmas stupid?" And like and it's like it is this passage of showing like how you're a little adult that doesn't care, right?
But that's I think something he kind of that there's like a sadness. That's where the
Yeah.
melancholy is. Because eventually we see Emily, that's the girl who does it. When they're running around, she goes back to the diner and tries to get into the dumpster.
Yeah.
But there's this whole little subplot of the woman who runs the diner has been going after freegans that have been getting into her dumpster. So it shows that like Emily does really care, but she's putting on this show.
She's putting on the show and she's also a teenager that has to clash with her mom about certain
Well,
things.
but I think that's also he points out kind of the sadness of the way our society has made it where this is kind of a thing we have to do when we really don't.
Yeah.
Like you really don't have to be cruel in order to become a grown up. Like, but it's in the States, it is a thing where it's like, well, if you stay earnest about things or you remain like genuinely passionate about something, that becomes an object of mockery in a
Yeah.
lot of like circles, and which is very sad. And I think Taramina points that out. I thought this so much Christmas movie stuff. I think it was maybe 2 years ago. We watched a very 2000s Christmas, and it
Mhm.
was just dreadful getting through those
Yeah, it was
movies.
really bad.
And thankfully, Christmas with the Cranks is the only one I remember the
Hmm.
title of, and that was awful. Uh, and I was thinking most Christmas fare today is way too high concept,
Hmm.
or it's focused on the fantastical elements of Christmas. So you think
Yeah.
of Elf, right, where it's not grounded in the reality of what it is to celebrate Christmas and be someone at Christmas. And I think that this made me think of a movie that does do that, which is A Christmas Story.
Hmm.
I think is one of the few Christmas classics that is genuinely it comes from a place of nostalgia that remembers with a sense of humor and tenderness about things.
Yeah.
Where it's not trying to paint a perfect picture. It's just kind of showing you what it was like with an air of that was really fun. Like I can't go back there. I don't know if I really want to go back there, but I can remember that it was really fun to be like a kid on
Yeah.
Christmas Eve when it was like that.
I mean, I think this also, to me, the reason that I like this film a lot, it kind of reminds me either like the repetitions of the Christmases when you were growing up, and because I had a lot of cousins, I would be like witness to like either their behaviors or things that I wouldn't have seen because my brother wasn't old enough during that time.
Or they're just being raised in different households with
Yeah.
different standards.
And it's sort of like Uh, which brought up to like that thing of like what I liked was when the teenagers like left, Michelle, who's older, goes with them, buys them liquor, but happens to meet someone else during the diner that's her age.
I think it's someone she knows because this is where she lives.
Yes.
And it's Lynn, played by Elsie Fisher, who's working the counter at the
Yeah.
diner. And there's clearly like an affection towards each other
Yes.
here.
And so they decide to go hang off by themselves. Which is completely understandable because the joke is like she's like her friend is being like, "Oh, hang out with you?" And the children, meaning like the the cousins who
Yeah.
just are a few years younger. And she's like, "Oh yeah, it's gonna be fine." Like there's never this moment where you think you might see it from other films that Michelle, ridicules her cousin for being younger. It is this very much understanding, like, yeah, you want to get away from your family. It's kind of weird.
W-
And
In
then,
a certain way, they're unofficial chaperones
yes.
because they're going to step in if things go past a certain line.
Yes. But it's also like how now that I've come to an age where I started asking more questions from my mom, like now the past becomes a little bit solidified as to what the awkwardness was during certain holidays, right? Because she had so many siblings. Like, oh, so and so was mad about like that they didn't get a gift when so and so did. And how we almost forget that the adults in our lives have emotions themselves, even though they're trying to set up this holiday to be fun for
Well, it's like
us.
when you're a kid, you just don't contemplate the inner complexity of other people
Yeah, and
on that
like
level.
this
Yeah.
one shows it, right? Because even though like Emily feels bad for throwing away the gift that her she's supposed to give her mom, she is unaware that her mom is like right now going through this hard conversation of where does she put her own mother? And there is even a scene where like Emily's mother is like so kind of like overwhelmed by what's going on that she lays her head on her own mother's like shoulder, needing to be comforted like a child herself. And because she knows due to like information that she got from her brother, like this is the last Christmas there. And she could open up her mouth and ruin it for everybody, but she decides to keep her mouth shut because she doesn't want like for things to go sour for everybody.
One thing I liked about this movie were the interactions between in-laws and the core family here. Ben Shankman, who I think there was that Julia Louis-Dreyfus movie that came out, was it this year or last year?
You hurt my
Yeah.
feelings.
And he played himself, I think, because
Okay, yeah,
it was a
yeah,
one-man show that he was
yeah,
in. So yeah, he plays Lenny, who is married to Kathleen, and they are the parents of Emily, the teenager we've been talking about. So he married into the family.
yeah.
And there were just little moments I loved at the dinner table. He sat between Emily and Michelle,
Uh-huh.
and there's like some conversation with him and Michelle, and then later, when the teenagers and Michelle are gone, he ends up seated next to the one adult grandchild who's she's the one married to Ty,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and they're just the way he was talking to her. I was like, it reminded me of conversations I'd seen between like an uncle or aunt who'd married into the family because they
Yeah,
talk to those kids in a different way. I don't know how
yeah.
to describe it, but like people who marry into a family, it's almost like they talk to you like you're more of a person
Yeah,
because they
yeah.
don't have all the emotional baggage that
Well, he
everyone
was also
else.
like, I think at some point he either offends her or someone else, and he's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry," and like they're kind of like it was someone else. It wasn't Lynn.
Well, I think he said something and it didn't offend them, it just emotionally upset them.
Yeah,
And so, but it's, yeah, there, like I was saying, there's scenes in here of things that I've never experienced, but felt like people really have experienced this.
yeah.
And we haven't even talked about the Michael, Sarah, Greg Turkington subplot that runs through the movie, which isn't like
It's
that big of a,
not terrible. I think it was just like it's supposed to be a point of humor in the film that it's kind of
but
like,
it's, and I think it was something they used to sell the movie in the trailers,
yeah.
but it's really like my least, the part of the movie I was least interested in.
Yeah, it doesn't ruin the movie. It doesn't make the movie. It's just, it's almost a point that it's supposed to be where everyone is supposed to give the full attention because of the odd conversation between the two of
Well,
them.
and like Sarah's a producer on the film, so it may have been, and I mean, Michael Sarah, wonder, I think he's pushing 40, right? He's getting up there. 36, yeah. So he's been in the movie industry long enough that he probably understood like we want more people to see this movie than probably have seen other Taormina movies. So like we'll put some faces in the movie and names that get attention because of course we have Francesca Scorsese.
Yeah.
We also have Sawyer Spielberg,
Yeah.
who is Steven Spielberg's son, and we've seen in one other film. And you have Elsie Fisher. Lev Cameron was someone I wasn't sure who they were, and I had to look him up. I think he's like a YouTube musician who probably the children. He's popular with the children. And so it was one of those where these are the faces and names we put in the trailer and at the beginning of the movie's credits. But really, this movie is about this family
Yeah.
of actors who probably are a lot of people that Tyler Taormina knows because that's what he does in a lot of his movies is he casts people in Long Island who maybe do like local theater.
Yeah.
One of those actors that really stuck out to me, Chris Lazaro, who's playing one of those like adult grandchildren.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
He was really good. I really enjoyed him because you get the sense this was a guy who was like a fuck up in high school, most likely,
Yeah.
but he's trying to be a good member of the family now.
Yeah, I like also the way it was juxtaposed between like teenagers getting in trouble and then him sitting like playing the piano, singing holiday songs.
When he brings a friend with him who's clearly on like
We don't know,
weed, I
like,
think, or something.
like we can't really tell if they're a couple or they're just friends.
Well, his friend is introduced to us. He's standing in the bathroom and he's kind of like he looks anxious and he's staring at like a painting in the bathroom. So immediately I'm like, that guy's high. That's what high people do when they go to a bathroom in a house they don't know very well. And so like they have some kind of like they provide some humor, I think, to the movie that's pretty good. Uh but yeah, it just felt very authentic, I think is the best word to describe it. Would you recommend that our audience seek this movie out this holiday season?
Yes, I do. I think this gave me the feeling that the holdovers I wished it would have given me.
Because when you think about the holdovers now, it does feel very contrived compared to
Yeah.
this. I think if you like things like A Charlie Brown Christmas,
Hmm.
if you like A Christmas Story, it's those Christmas things that aren't about Santa and magic and all of this. They're just kind of about people at the holidays. And in particular, in this instance, not like Christmas with the Cranks, which is like a cartoon show. This feels very real. And I think if you are someone who's around our age and probably a little younger, this is going to be a big nostalgia experience for you. Cat is a solitary animal, but as its home is devastated by a great flood, he finds refuge on a boat populated by various species and will have to team up with them despite their differences. This is our review of Flow, an computer animated film that was released this year. Before we get into details and I give you some background about this movie, what were your just initial thoughts? Because this was not a movie you knew anything about.
Nope.
I just turned it on
Hmm.
because the other movie I was wanting us to watch just isn't available yet. So I was searching went to Metacritic. If our audience doesn't go there, it's a pretty good website. And you can go to Best Movies of the Year list. And it has every movie that comes out throughout the year with a score. And so I was looking, okay, what are some of the must-watch movies of 2024? And this was on that list. So I thought, it's different than what we normally watch. We'll watch it, we'll review it. So, what did you think? I turned on the movie started. What were your initial thoughts?
So the animation is not the type that I was used to. At first, it felt as if somebody was doing a cheap version of a Ghibli film.
Clearly an influence.
Yes.
Yeah.
But then over time, the art and the movement of it starts to win you over. It feels like you're watching someone's Let's Play, but it is just fluid.
It's like the greatest video game Let's Play ever made.
Yes. Like if someone was like, "Hey, this movie is really just a Let's Play of like someone playing that one of the, like a modded version of a cat like game that we've seen recently," I would have fucking believed it. But It was done, but it's done beautifully well. Like, I'm not saying this in order for the audio. It's just, it was a different way to shoot the movie that was expected, that is charming and allows you to really experience the world through the cat's eyes.
Yeah. Saw someone say it's PlayStation 2 level graphics, but cinematic brilliance.
Yes.
And I think that's a great way to describe it because you'd think like, oh, quality of animation doesn't sound like it would be very good. You won't care. You're going to be caught up in the movie.
No.
And it does show you that you don't have to have the best textures on your because that's the thing is it's mostly the textures are rough, but the movements are so fluid. Of
Yeah,
every
so
animal
good.
moves, they clearly studied these animals and their movements. So this is a Latvian film.
Okay.
The director is I'm probably not going to pronounce the name right. Gins Zibalodis. Zilbalodis. This is their second feature.
Hmm.
The film was completely rendered on the open source software Blender,
Good for them.
and which I think is once again a testament to Disney can have and Pixar can have all kinds of proprietary shit, right? They can have all kinds of special deals and these giant rigs to like render animation. You don't need that. You just need someone who has like a vision and some basic tools to execute that vision.
Yeah.
And this shows me that like because I'm not a big animated movie person, like you can
No.
attest to this. I think I've been had more of an interest in anime lately
Yeah.
and trying to watch like quality anime. And I've always loved like the Studio Ghibli films. And then there's certain like cartoons from my childhood that are just they're like nostalgic things. But even then, I'm hesitant to revisit them because I'm like, well, if I revisit it, I'm gonna see how poor quality it
Yeah.
was. So it'll just be a memory. This film has zero dialogue. That was one of the first things I loved was that none of the animals talk.
Yeah.
So yet without dialogue, I understood the individuality of each character and their relationships to each other.
Yeah.
So I understood what annoyed Capybara.
Yeah.
I understood what drove Lemur.
Yeah.
I understood why I don't know what that bird was. Why the bird got frustrated
Yeah.
and walked away.
Yeah.
It all made sense to me.
Hmm.
And then, which in turn makes you care about these characters who you never hear say a word.
No.
So that when they're in peril, you're genuinely worried for them.
Yeah.
So not only is there no dialogue, and they're also not real. Like they're clearly CG.
Yeah, like there's like these great parts, for example, there's a pack of dogs that of course the cat is very wary of, and then there's a golden retriever dog that's just looking at cat like we're friends.
Well, golden retriever gets separated from the other dogs.
Yeah,
and
but
is with cat.
even at the
Yeah.
beginning, like he's looking at the cat, like he doesn't snitch to the cat immediately. He's just looking at the cat like, oh look, the cat's got the fish.
Yeah.
And that's when the other dogs react, and he's just kind of like, but anytime he's encountering the cat, he's like, hey, cool, like we're in the same place. And the cat's like, fuck you.
Well, I think at its core, this is a movie about solidarity.
Yeah.
And it's about there's no reason that these various species should be working together, except for the fact there is a massive crisis going on around them, and individually they will die.
Yeah.
And so the only way they can survive this crisis is they have to figure out how to work together, and each of them brings a different skill set to the table.
Yeah.
The environments I found very interesting because I think they were very aesthetically similar to the work of Fumito Ueda,
Okay.
who is a video game designer that made Ico, Shadow of the Colossus, The Last Guardian.
Okay.
And I think it's especially when they get to the city. Because another thing is because there's no dialogue, we don't get any exposition to explain if this is Earth in the future, if this is another planet, if this is a fantasy world. And I love that part of it because it added mystery.
Yeah.
It felt like as we were watching the movie, we were also exploring this place. And we were never going to get a definitive answer as to like, where are we here?
Yeah.
But it reminded me a lot of, especially The Last Guardian, that video game, where you have the scale of it. It's this towering like city that just seems endless and can be explored for like forever. And you can explore it vertically, you can explore it horizontally. There's so much there. And I think one of the things I thought as I'm watching, Cat on this boat and it's going through these what have become canals in the city was like, ooh, wouldn't it be fun to like hop off the boat and like explore that building and see what's in there? And so that's like the video game-ness of it, where that the fun of exploration
Yeah.
and not knowing what's going to come next. Uh, I think there's something special about movies with animals that don't speak.
Yeah.
Uh,
And I think it's done in a way that it's not necessary because I think about the films of my childhood that was like Homebound.
Homeward Bound.
Homeward Bound, like where like the voices had to accentuate like how stressed the animal was. Or it's also just I think a lot of ways like when you have reality-based films, I feel like the voices are there to almost like tell the audience, don't worry, it's okay. The actors are doing a voiceover and these animals were never in harm. But you still feel like that stress because you think like an animal doesn't know why it's being thrown into the water
Yeah.
and now is having to like fight against the current. Like an animated film can get away with it while also allowing us to feel concern towards the animal. Like the first few times that cat goes into the water, I genuinely was concerned because it's like
Well,
cat.
the physics in the
Yeah.
movie, that's one of the areas where because I kept thinking, like, what about this movie is feeling so real?
It was like the way like
The
the water would
the
dip into the
water
water.
physics
Yes.
and the camera movement, they basically simulate low angle handheld camera work.
Yeah.
So you're like on the ground with the cat, and you're like the camera kind of is trying to walk around the cat to avoid running into him or crossing his path.
Yeah.
So like yeah, it just felt so fluid.
Hmm.
And I felt like I was right there with him all the time. And like you were saying, yeah, we dip below the water and we get that sense of like what it's like to be in deep water.
Yeah.
And you're kind of like, oh, I'm a little scared. I think I
Yeah.
might start sinking here. Um, but yeah, I think not having dialogue changes it. And I was trying to figure out why, but I think it engages our brains more and makes us have to observe.
Yeah, because we're also having to observe the fact that like how the other animals react, or also having to really get into the details when like for example with the birds, how they looked exactly the same except for like the topping of the feathers for you to distinguish between like two birds, one that's protecting cat, the other one that's trying to attack it.
But then like Cat doesn't really get that, where he's just like at first.
Yeah.
He's just like, why is this bird keep trying to kill me?
Yeah, and it's like the distinguishedness of them, like because with the dogs they get away with a little bit more by having different breeds, and the capybara being like the only capybara there.
And the lemur.
Yeah, and the lemur, and so their personalities are obvious, but it's like it forces you to look at the details and also like even the subtleness of like their eyes, which they would use beautifully well in this animation, which a lot of times you can't capture that when you go into like real motion, which is something that like people have criticized for like the live action version of like
Lion King with dead
like
eyes. The
yes.
animals, which is in real life is, yeah, animals don't have expressive eyes because they don't need to express themselves through their eyes. But like the cat here clearly has the most cartoonish eyes.
Yeah.
But then like Bird feels completely realistic because it's hard to read Bird's emotions other than through body language.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the way it is with most of the other animals, is it's their body language tells you their mood.
Hmm.
And they do things that aren't necessarily realistic. Like Bird is steering the rudder
Yeah.
at a certain point, and that's just not realistic, of course. But we let them get away with it because there's still so much of these animals that are grounded in the way they behave in real life
Yeah.
that you're like, I'll forgive a few things. I think children would absolutely love this movie.
Yes.
And that's something that there's probably people who think that you need the voices to tell the children what to think or how to feel. I saw a review on Letterboxd where they saw this in a theater with a lot of children in it, and they said those kids were absolutely silent and their eyes were locked on the screen the entire time. And the only time they made noise was when Cat would fall out of the boat and they would scream things like, no, 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 get in the boat. Like they were in it. They were in this movie. Uh, and I think, and it's like the perfect length. It's an hour 25.
Yeah, I do think that you've got a niece out there that would probably adore this film if like they let
Yes.
her watch it.
I will say we watched it high.
Yes.
And it was a great high
It was
watch
very
too.
well
Oh
made.
my God. I have not, there are a few movies I've seen that were as fun to watch as this one high.
There was plenty of times where I was just like, Cat, no, 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 get
Well,
back in the boat. Get
I was
back in
just
the boat.
like, when he's walking around the forest for like the first 15 minutes of the movie, I'm just like slack jawed, like, wow, it's so amazing. And I love how we never get an explanation about the flood.
No.
We can make some leaps about, environmental collapse.
Yeah, but we don't need to if we're viewing it through their eyes.
For the animal, it's one day everything was dry, and the next day,
Things were wet, and then it flooded.
uh, and the flood comes on in a really interesting way because I started to notice patches of the forest floor that were suddenly like pooling,
Yeah.
and it was just very subtle. And
Yeah,
I think
because I remember at the beginning it was like, okay, why is there water there? And then like and I in my head I'm like, a flood's coming because like there's like an ambush of animals running.
yeah, that he noticed like a herd of animals or like
And,
a
like-
flock of birds suddenly flying really fast away. But it's like from the cat's point of view, he's just like, I wonder where they're going. And you as the audience member, you're picking up on the context clues of, uh-oh, something's about to happen in this place. I was thinking of Robert Zemeckis's not stop motion, but just animated movies, which I don't know if I've seen any of them. I've seen part of Beowulf, and I've seen clips from the Polar Express. I think next December we will watch the Polar Express just because I've never seen it, and I'm like, well, but all that shit looks ugly as fuck. Like Robert Zemeckis' stuff is ugly. Or like we talked about the Lion King remake, just is very bland and boring looking.
Yeah.
And those are movies with massive budgets and celebrity voices and all those things. And I just think of like regular Disney movies. Very few of them have compelled me in the way this movie did.
Yeah, that is very true.
We watched Inside Out recently for the first time.
For you.
It was it was the first time I'd seen it. You'd seen it?
Yeah.
When did you see it? Because we were married when that movie came out. So
Impressive episode. Watched it alone.
So made you more depressed? Because you were like, the quality of film is terrible. I
don't get it.
I just didn't. I don't emotionally connect with Pixar movies.
No.
I don't know how to explain it. I don't
one that
care.
I should watch, but at the same time, I'm just like, I don't want to be like upset afterwards.
Why would you be upset?
Because like I know it's just like you had two white dudes do a movie about like a Mexican boy. So I'm
About
just,
Day of the Dead?
yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think part of it is I don't like the dialogue in those movies. I think the dialogue is trying to be too cutesy. I don't like trying to do jokes. When I think of animated stuff what I like is the Wallace and Gromit movies and Shaun the Sheep, which are very silent.
Yeah.
Or there was that animated film Triplets of Belleville that came out like 20 years ago.
Perfect Blue.
Oh yeah, the anime Perfect Blue was
Yeah.
very good. Yeah, I really like that one. And I think for me, animation works best when it adheres to some of those core cinematic principles, one of them is cinema is a visual language. You don't need dialogue. Dialogue is just if you want to have it in there to accentuate the film. That like a good movie should work just as images.
I believe that.
And that's something like Kubrick really held firm to. So like he really wanted 2001 to be a movie where you could watch it and there's not a line of dialogue and that movie you're like, no, I get it. I get what was going on. Flow is a movie where none of the characters speak. but I cared about those characters. I understood every step of the way what was going on. All of the foreshadowing worked.
Yeah.
The building of tension worked. The the moments you were supposed to feel sad, I felt sad. The moments you were supposed to feel joy, I felt joy. Like it was one of those movies where this filmmaker understands animation better than a lot of our big animation studios right now. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing what, and I'm going to try to say their name again, Zilba Lotus will be making next because when watching this movie, I feel like this is the future of animation.
Yeah. This
Using
is
that like PlayStation kind of stylization, yeah,
yeah.
that's future.
And it should change over time. We've seen the way that like the Spider-Verse films have changed because we like animation because by watching like the new Teenage Mutant Turtles,
Or
but it's
that
like
the Puss in Boots movie was influenced.
yeah, and
Or
it's
like the Dogman movie that's coming out looks to me to be very influenced by
and I
Spider-Verse.
think it's just sort of like having this cookie cutter look that Pixar has given us isn't enough. There
It's
has to
boring.
be, yeah, it's this was such an interesting way to show a film that I hope that more animators see it and take note and decides to do something completely different. So it's more visually interesting and you're enriching children to see something that isn't just the same style over and over again.
I want to say, I want to check this out. Yeah, it was nominated for a special award at Cannes, but did not win it. And there's a lot. Yeah, it's been nominated for Best Animated Feature at the Golden Globes and the Critics' Choice Movie Awards. I feel that it should get an Oscar nomination for Best Animated Film.
Yeah.
And in my mind, I would give it to it because the thing is, they're probably going to give it to a fucking Pixar movie or something.
The Oscars aren't owned by Disney.
Yeah. Is it still on ABC? Yeah. And so I think this is the kind of movie that takes a type of animation that we don't see in cinema and shows you how it can work there. And that makes me very interested to see all the possibilities of what could we do with this kind of video game style animation in a cinematic space. Like that's really interesting and cool to me. I know your answer already, but would you recommend this movie to our audience?
Yes.
Okay, that was an odd voice. But yes, I would recommend it. And I'd say, especially if you have kids, I think they would really enjoy Flow. Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode. Make sure to check out our show notes for important links to other things, including our website, popcult.blog. Also, make sure that you're subscribed wherever it is you listen to podcasts so you'll be notified when new episodes are up. If you visit popcult.blog right now, you're going to find a lot more reviews. And for December, we're doing a series I am calling A Christmas Gift to Myself, where I'm just kind of watching a hodgepodge of movies from across the decades that I've wanted to watch. This week on the blog, you'll be seeing reviews for the Joan Crawford Western Johnny Guitar and the Alice Rohrwacher film Happy as Lazaro. We'll also have a couple TV reviews coming this week. Apple TV Plus's Disclaimer, starring Cate Blanchett and directed by Alfonso Cuarón, and a review for a show that's been on my watch list for many years, the classic British series The Prisoner. If you enjoy what we do here on the podcast and over on the blog, we'd encourage you to support us on Patreon. There's lots of reward levels that you can pick from there. We want to thank our patron, Matt, who donates at the writer's room level. That means he gets to pick a movie every month for me to watch and review. We've been waiting on a Nora to come out in December, and there's still time. We still have about half the month left, but I'm really hoping it comes out. Otherwise, he's going to have to pick something different for December, and we'll just make a Nora our January pick. We also have patron-exclusive podcasts available. We just finished our Love at First Laugh, which was a series on romantic comedies. And coming up in the new year, we're going to be doing a director spotlight on Japanese director Ryosuke Hamaguchi, who directed one of my favorite films of this year, Evil Does Not Exist. And he directed, I believe it was Drive My Car, which was one of Ariana's favorite films from a few years back. Well, our next episode of the podcast, that'll be our Christmas special. And we're going to be delivering 3 reviews. We will be reviewing the Bill Murray classic Scrooged, the Tim Burton film Edward Scissorhands, and the David Bowie movie Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence. Well, until next time, you keep listening, we'll keep watching. Our podcast music was provided by thepodcasthost.com and Alitu, the podcast maker. Find your own free podcast music over at thepodcasthost.com/free music.